we're going to talk a bit about transparency. In order to keep up the habit of always starting with etymology, the root of words, transparency has a very clear and simple origin. Trans means from one place to another, and parents comes from parecer, which means to seem, to appear, to be present. In other words, when you combine trans with parents, you're saying that something appears from one side to another. It is indeed observed from all positions surrounding it, meaning light passes through it and it can be seen from within from all angles that surround it. That would be the idea of transparency. Today, we've been talking a lot about this characteristic. I've been calling it a characteristic because I hesitate to call it a virtue, since any virtue can be used for good or for bad. As Kant said, only goodwill, which is the will to achieve good, cannot be used one way or the other, but especially transparency. This cannot be used one way or the other, but especially transparency, depending on the context. It ceases to be a virtue, it can become an excess. So, it's very important for us to explore, to circle around this word. With this great habit that philosophers have of not accepting things at first glance, if you ever read a Platonic dialogue, you'll see how Socrates, who is the main character in most of the Platonic dialogues, circles around a text, circles around a statement, to draw out all possible consequences, and to imagine which of them are relevant and which are not. Well, none of us are Socrates, but we follow this path, inspired by philosophy. So, let's do the same thing. Let's take a spin around this concept of transparency. Well, in physics, as I've mentioned to you, means an object that is penetrated by visible light, that is, this common light that we have here. If I have, for example, a glass, I can see it from one side to the other, everything it contains inside. If there were something suspended in this water, would see it perfectly. In other words, the transparent is that which, whose nature, whose essence is visible to common light. Light is capable of passing through it. It's interesting to highlight this characteristic that depending on the type of light that hits an object, almost everything becomes transparent. So, according to physics, if you pass through, for example, make a technical application of ultraviolet light, infrared rays, X-rays, most materials exhibit transparency. It can be seen from the inside, just like with our suitcase, when it goes through the airport. Isn't it like that? And it's somewhat interesting because this provides a great analogy with human nature. Depending on the approach, the circumstance you apply to a human being, everyone becomes transparent. Transparency is always a conscious choice. But transparency in moments of anger, fear, panic, anxiety, it is very, even if unwanted. It exposes us a lot. A historical moment like the one we are living in. It made many people transparent because they were illuminated by an unusual light. The light of great fear, of a very tense situation, of a danger of many losses, this made many people become transparent. And what we saw wasn't always very good. I've been telling people that I don't know if this crisis put masks on humanity or if it took them off. In many cases, it took them off, in many cases. It wasn't so pretty what we could see in the people around us. Well, in the figurative sense, which is more about the human aspect, transparency is a characteristic of a person or organization that hides nothing. In other words, it allows its components, its members, sometimes even through media mechanisms, to the general public to know all the elements of its balance sheet, how it operates, and what tools it employs. A transparent person, then, is someone who has no secrets. All the time, every aspect of it is illuminated. Well, it's obvious that this has a great advantage. But there's also a little corner of disadvantage. A healthy privacy is something we all have a right to. This already sparks a big discussion, which is happening very strongly in our days. A transparent organization is one that makes its information public. In other words, quote unquote, that has nothing to hide. if that can be taken so literally. It seems that all manifested beings have something that would be good to hide. Not out of bad intentions, but out of modesty, out of privacy, and we will talk a lot about this. Further on, transparency in negotiations. Today, in the business market, this word is widely used. This noun is very common, an attribute sought today within the financial and business market, and it is used with some aspects that we are already quite familiar with. Through newspapers, through media outlets. Transparency in negotiations. No one is lying to anyone. If I'm negotiating with you, I offer a product that is exactly as you see it. I'm not hiding anything about this product. It's not a car that has been in several accidents. I refurbished it and I can tell you it's never been in an accident. No, you know the entire history of the car. And the price you offer me is also not trying to exploit me or take advantage from the fact that I urgently need money, but it's the fair price that an object in such conditions deserves to receive. In short, that is a transparent negotiation, where the intentions of both parties are perfectly visible, exposed, laid out on the table with great calmness. It's not that common. We know this, but today it's a value that is quite sought after, at least in theory. Deceptive advertising, ambiguous meanings, and ambiguities information when offering something are, of course, examples of a lack of transparency in social relations. Deceptive advertising, ambiguity when describing a product or service offered to you, we practically encounter this every day. And this is a clear symptom of a lack of transparency. In other words, this market when profit, loss, gains, or setbacks come into play. Transparency is a virtue, in this case, that requires a lot of strength. It's not so easy. We're still trying to implement this vision in this field. In all spheres, from small private businesses to the corporate level. Public administration also, by serving the people, to serve the nation, has an obligation to account for what it is doing with this public resource. That often does it through, once again, means of communication, publications, announcements, things of that nature. Now, yes, let's move to that point which, for philosophy, is where the story begins. Remember that I've already told you many times in our series of talks the story of the puddle. You want to clean up a puddle on the floor. You also have to look up. See the leak, go there, and seal the ceiling to fix that leak. If you don't clean the floor, it's just a temporary fix. Looking up and seeing the leak is like looking within and seeing the origin of the problems inside us. Where does the lack of transparency come from? This is very important, and it's actually an example of transparency. We need to see that legal entities, institutions, organizations are a fiction. In reality, what you have there are human beings. One who leads and sets the tone, others who are there providing support in some way, and others who are executing. Ultimately, everything is a human issue. And we must not lose sight of this. Otherwise, we start blaming organizations and humans become victims. What do you mean? What are organizations? Are they a bogeyman that came from Mars? No. Organizations are, at their core, people in relation and working towards a purpose. That's all it is. They're people. Therefore, we must analyze the origin of problems transparently and see that it lies within human beings, like us. Probably, this problem exists within ourselves. In other words, the internal field is always where everything begins. In interactions, this is actually quite an interesting thing. If you look at some details of assertive communication, which is something very trendy today, one of the things you do when you want to establish contact with a new person, a stranger, that first interaction sometimes creates a moment of insecurity. It wants us very quick to say who you are and what you intend. What is your intention? Because from there, the other side can say, oh, that's it. So now we can talk openly, no problem. I already know your intention. This is a very good element of transparency in communications. Very quickly, I'm Lucia, and I'm interested in the product you're advertising. Ah, yes, that's right. Sometimes, even because we tend to be verbose, because we don't see the need for it, we end up dragging out a conversation that frustrates the other side, who doesn't know, after all, where we're trying to go with all this. You might remember, or maybe not, maybe some from my generation, the younger ones won't remember this, the encyclopedia salesman who used to knock on our doors. He was the king of lacking transparency in communication. He would say good morning, greet you, comment on your house, your kids, how cute they were, and if you were in a good mood, he would string you along for about 15 minutes before finally saying he wanted to offer you an encyclopedia. In other words, even if you didn't buy the encyclopedia, you had already lost 15 minutes. And that was exasperating. And today, it's the stereotype of poorly done communication. So, transparency is clearly shedding light on what you truly intend, who you are, and what your real intentions are. In personal relationships, it's the same thing. Here we're talking more about a relationship, let's say, centered around some interest. But in personal relationships, indeed, in coexistence, it's also necessary to have clear intentions and absence of masks and manipulation. In other words, exactly who I am, what I expect from our relationship, whether it's a conversation, a deeper friendship, how much of my time I have to offer you. You will say this clearly, as if it were a questionnaire for the person. But make this well understood throughout the conversation. Don't create false expectations. Many times, this is used as manipulation. I find it amazing because throughout my life as a woman, now at 56 years old, how many times have I come across people who, in order to sell me something or pass on some service, they start playing a little game of sensuality to catch my attention and interest in what I was going to say, and you look and say, oh, yes, yes, because you can see it's a person from a good family, so polite, so beautiful. Today, you're here, and they want to sell you encyclopedia, many times of this type and other types. We falsify our true intentions for some purpose, which, given the lack of transparency, probably isn't a very good one. In general, the lack of transparency hides ulterior motives. Unless you're hiding someone's birthday cake to surprise us. The lack of transparency generally hides exclusive objectives. So, let it be clear, in the way we relate to people, how do we intend to maintain this relationship? What is it about? Without creating false expectations, nor illusions, or anything of that sort. With ourselves, this is perhaps the most important point of all. I've told you countless times that story of the more inside, the more outside. And the opposite also works. Because the more outside, if you create a pleasant, conducive environment for transparency to prevail, it's logical that you also encourage this transparency in the human being to come to light. In other words, the opposite also happens. The more outside, the more inside. Culture, the human environment around you. It doesn't determine you to be transparent, but it extends a good invitation. Isn't that right? So, with ourselves, the fundamental question is, in front of our conscience. We have a meeting point with it. I always recommend keeping a journal every day to see if my sense of life is there. Did my day today lead me in that direction? Or did I stand still? Or did I go in the opposite direction? Because if I went in the opposite direction one day, tomorrow I can correct it. If I incorporate consciousness into my day, I don't lose several days. At most, I lose one. It can be corrected. But if I keep living hidden from my own conscience, relying on impunity, because I won't have to take responsibility for it. In front of my conscience, I can stray so far from my purpose, from my sense of life, that when I become aware, it's no longer worth it. There's no more time. Much has already been done in the opposite direction. So, transparency is with ourselves. It's about setting a meeting with our conscience. It was what Plato called coming from the bones, where we manage, in relation to what I want from my life, what I did with my day. If I did something that has nothing to do with my life, with my sense of life, what was so alluring that pulled me out of myself? so that I can devise a strategy to pass through there next time with more attention. Ultimately, the fundamental transparency, which is the foundation of all others, is being transparent before our own conscience, without subterfuge, without illusions, without manipulations. From there, you can have a transparent society, a transparent institution, a transparent social relationship. I believe, and this crisis has increasingly brought me this conviction, that people use the noise of the world, the stress of the world, to escape from themselves, who are terrified of this transparency before their own conscience. They're afraid to admit that they have no dreams, or if they do, they don't honor them. If they have a purpose, they don't even remember it exists. And they go on living their life chaotically, according to external stimuli. Are you afraid to admit that? You fear the pain? So, use all the distractions of the world to escape from yourself. Living turned outward. And when this was cut off by isolation, there were people who despaired, precisely because they couldn't stand their own company. Amazing, isn't it? But we have seen this happen. Awakened consciousness, human values, all these are fundamental ingredients for the human being. That the foundation of building transparency in any collective environment can, in fact, be transparent. Then, the awakened consciousness, knowing who one is, that is, where I am now and where I want to go. This is the foundation of identity. A transparent man must have identity, know where he wants to go with all of this, with his life as a whole, and where he is now. And manage every step you take every day. In other words, a conscious and active awareness within your life. Human values. May your entire life be structured around a core of human values. A law that I choose to obey, which is the law of life, the law of nature, the law that governs what a human being should be. Dignity, human values, the level of wisdom that corresponds to me as a human being. And I obey this because I find fulfillment in doing so. This pillar of human values is fundamental for transparency. And if not, what are you transparent in front of? My consciousness is entirely built on human values. If I have no value, I have no consciousness. In front of whom are you transparent? There isn't an internal observer to look at your day, establish a relationship, and say no. This means you betrayed yourself today. Dignity of purpose. In other words, let's not forget that ultimately we are here for one thing, to become more human. Indeed, with values, with virtues, with wisdom, to leave the world a little greater than when we entered it, to bring value to the people around us. Never forget who you are. Never lose your identity. Never lose sight of our sense of purpose in life. The star that is on the horizon. Because it's always like the star, which was somewhere in the sky, that people have used to guide themselves throughout history. A man who does not see the star is a man who is lost or disoriented, lost his north, lost his east. Our north, our east, is our sense of purpose in life, where we want to go with all of this. And our consciousness is situated. It's founded upon this. And from that, it looks at our life and helps us establish a worthy coherent life. That is, it makes us transparent. Demanding transparency is the most common thing these days. Ah, this process wasn't transparent. That decision wasn't transparent. Within the institutional market, this is very common. But everything in the world is dual and is completed with both halves, not just one. Those who demand transparency have the moral obligation to grant transparency. You are transparent. In other words, are your motivations clear in everything you do? Is it clear that you put your best into it, or are you just pretending? Or not even pretending at all? It's another type of negative transparency, which is clearly showing your ill will. Is it clear what you expect from each person? Is it clear on what basis you establish a relationship? There's a detail, something that always hurts me whenever it happens. But it's very frequent. You must have seen it before. A person who is talking to someone on the phone, right next to you. And when they hang up the phone, they make a face and badmouth the person they were talking to. How is that? Common. How recurring it is. Few. How do you say it? What time do you not know either? What time is it to call? There's always that. You didn't say that to the person. To establish a solid foundation of contact between you, because it wasn't transparent, what do you think about someone turning their back and knowing that the other person, who is behind them, was badmouthing them because they didn't say it to their face? In other words, those who demand transparency must grant transparency in all aspects of their lives. Because otherwise, you don't want to change the process, you want to change the person who is in that process. To let another in, maybe you, who are just as lacking in transparency as the person who was there. In other words, you want to change the positions of the pieces on a game board, but you don't want to change the game itself. You simply want to change the side you're playing on, whether you want to be on that committee. Now, if you don't have transparency here, you won't have it there either. In other words, you don't want to change the game, you want to change your position in the game. And that's not transparent at all. In other words, transparency must be demanded and also offered. Otherwise, you're not doing anything. There's a passage from Epictetus in his Maxims in the Enchiridion where he says the following: at any moment, could someone see your thoughts? That is, could you immediately, Marcus Aurelius talks about this too. Answer that previous mentioned question. What are you thinking? Of course, you might say to me, no, there are moments when I won't respond, and it's fair not to respond. I'm thinking about something personal, something private, and I can't always respond. I agree with you. Transparency must be established while respecting certain limits of dignity, confidentiality, security, and even modesty. Of course, you're not going to expose everything that's on your mind, but everything that concerns the other, you should be able to share with them. Or else the game is tainted. Except in very special situations. Well, a police officer is setting a trap to catch a criminal. Of course, I'm not going to make that clear. For the other, otherwise it doesn't work. There are always exceptions. But, in most cases, that thought which concerns the other should be communicated to them. If not, I'm just playing. Because if not, it's a sign that I shouldn't be thinking it. If my life isn't entirely visible in this aspect that escapes my privacy, if it can't be seen by anyone who is interested, it's a sign that there's something false in the game. It's a sign that I'm ashamed of what I'm doing. Look, Plato talks about this, and it's very interesting. Shame is different from modesty. Modesty is about keeping what truly shouldn't be exposed. Shame. You keep what should be exposed. And you don't expose it because you know it's poorly done, that it is not worthy of being exposed. In other words, shame is a mask, modesty is not. Pain and dignity. In Indian tradition, both the Indian and Tibetan traditions, they have a name, which is Vajra or Dorj, meaning diamond. For them, the human mind should be like a Vajra or a Dorj. Tremendously brilliant, capable of multiplying light, eternally transparent, everything within it is so pure that it can be seen. From all sides, without any problem, and extremely resilient, firm, to the point that a diamond is capable of cutting glass. For example, cutting through other surfaces, a mask, so solid and well-grounded in its characteristics. So, for them, this is a characteristic of a mind. The mind is Vajra, or it is Dorj. Why? Because it has this transparency, this luminosity, this ability to multiply light, and also a lot of strength and foundation. It's not with just anything that you can penetrate it and corrupt it or lead it astray. It is very solid. It's not easy to penetrate it. And it's quite beautiful to imagine that transparency, within such an ancient tradition, holds an important role, an important attribute of minds that are sufficiently pure and powerful in such a way that you can say, this is a wise person. This is an attribute of a wise person. All right, I'm not wise, but a lover seeking wisdom. We all have to be, because that's why we came here. We came here to leave ignorance behind and get as close to seeking wisdom as we can. Every step we take towards wisdom, we increase our capacity to love, to respect, to have will, to have intelligence, to have determination, to have discernment. Our entire life is enriched with every step we take towards seeking wisdom. That's why we came here. It kind of reminds you of that biblical phrase, doesn't it? Seek first his kingdom, and all other things will be added to you. In other words, you illuminate one more step of your consciousness. You gain a greater vision of your nature and the nature of things. Of course, you will be able to comprehend, love, understand, and discern much better than before. There is no doubt about that. Therefore, from this comes the model of the diamond mind, which is ancient and speaks precisely about transparency. Well, in organizations, whether public or private institutions, the lack of transparency will lead to disorganization, because there's no way to coordinate elements that are happening in parallel. If one of them is hidden, if one of them is not clear, then you might have units within the same institution duplicating work, or even doing contradictory things. If there is no transparency, in other words, there is tremendous disorder. If the entire functioning of the organism is not well understood, it is not clear. Like a doctor to know the influences of a non-functioning organ on the body as a whole. In other words, everything must be very clear. He has to know the human body as a whole. If there is something clouded, it will reduce your ability to deal with this body. So, the organization relies heavily on transparency. Openness, that is, openness for a person who might have a new, original idea. Human beings are very creative. They have a lot of potential if you believe in them. If an institution is transparent, it costs nothing. A person who is part of a process, maybe not even in that exact process, might one day have a light bulb moment and say, wow, I have an idea that could improve that. It might be a wild guess, but it could also be an excellent idea. Humanity has taken turns in the realm of science and technology because someone once woke up with a wonderful idea in their mind. After much research, much searching, much studying, or sometimes even with an intuition that came from who knows where. And they went and molded that into a powerful transformation. You must stay alert. Because out there, all over the world, there are a bunch of children and young people, including in Brazil, coming up with small innovations. There's a type of plastic that's degradable, something or other, that's used in agriculture. They are tired of reading. And these news? What do they mean? They are seeing the needs of the country, because otherwise they wouldn't have creativity. Therefore, openness encourages each member to take responsibility for the challenges faced by the institution. And they feel encouraged to be more than just screw-turners. Not just in one corner, but as participants, co-authors, wherever they have an effective and applicable idea. This is another fundamental element for an institution. Communication. It's clear that for a person who had this idea to be able to communicate something with someone, it also requires transparency in human relationships. Look, if you come to me with a good idea, whatever the idea may be, I will consider it. If it's good, I'll be very happy. If it's not, I will still appreciate your collaboration. But I won't reject you. I'm not going to ask who you are to be getting involved in this. I won't slam the door in your face. I want to make the process work. And if you have an idea to help me with this, you're welcome. If it's not effective, the effort was still worthwhile, the attempt was valuable. If there isn't this transparency in communication, if the person feels that it's a game of jealousy and a game of owners of the ball. No, in this department, innovation only happens if it's me or my team. No one should try to meddle in my territory. Here am the one in charge. This is typical of mediocre institutions that will not grow. Solutions can come from anywhere. They can be situations transplanted from one place to another, which have some similarity in functioning. But if you don't understand how your little group works, if you've removed its transparency, no solution will come from anywhere. When I finish writing a text, which I usually do, I generally ask someone else to read it because I can't see anything anymore. When we get deeply involved with something, sometimes we lose sight of it. And if this communication isn't fluid and transparent, no one creates anything. One last attribute, which is also fundamental, is responsibility. Once you lay out a bunch of elements, you need to know that this person takes responsibility. There's a level of integration with the company, a moral foundation that ensures this. That's complicated because it won't take on this process. In the case of a private company, this can happen perfectly. And pass it on to the competitor, they won't take an idea. The modus operandi of a sector, and pass it on to someone who only wants to harm or sabotage it. Therefore, responsibility. It's a fundamental attribute that each person within an organization, within a relationship, within any kind of human group, must take responsibility. I take responsibility for what I see, for what I know. Therefore, transparency relies on the responsibility of each person involved in the process. Why do I find this complicated? Because today, unfortunately, our mechanisms for selecting people don't measure character, they only measure technical knowledge. This lack of character measurement puts us at risk of having someone with essential skills and experience, but not honest, not with integrity. And that's a whole discussion that could be another lecture. At what point? The most important thing on a resume will be the testimony of a good education, of a moral, ethical, and responsible conduct in everything they have done in life. A technical procedure, if this person doesn't know it, you teach them. But if a person lacks character, are you going to put them in a 6-month character course? That doesn't exist. Therefore, we should place more value on this formative aspect of the human being and consider it a fundamental element of a resume, where this person has been, what kind of behavior, in terms of character and responsibility, they demonstrate. This is much more important than what they know how to do. As incredible as it may seem, yes, today. Especially because a person of good character and responsibility, if they need to learn something, will do so very quickly. And when they take responsibility, they get things done. But the opposite is not feasible. No one learns to have character very quickly. If you haven't had your moment to embrace it, if you're not strongly committed to it, today we have what we call radical transparency. What does that mean? You will see, for example, countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, if I remember correctly, annually publish the basics of the income tax declaration of all their citizens. Well, there are many people who praise it, saying, "Wow, how wonderful! This is radical transparency." I think it's an exaggeration, honestly, because each person, materially speaking, as long as they have it honestly, it's each person's own business. I believe transparency shouldn't invade a basic privacy that makes people feel like they're going through an airport X-ray with their privacy invaded. We need to consider the social benefit of what we are going to make transparent. What is the social benefit? If someone is earning a lot, we see it, we investigate. No, there should be some fine-tooth comb within the institution that collects the tax. And generally there is. It's not the public that does this. It's not meant for him to do that. What is the social utility of reaching radical levels at certain moments? It doesn't exist. There is an exposure of privacy that can sometimes become quite unpleasant. That's why I said that transparency is not exactly a virtue, but rather a certain quality. When misused, it can result in a flaw. Concealment versus privacy. This is a strong debate. What is it that I'm hiding because I'm concealing something wrong? It is what I'm hiding because it's my privacy. Don't I have the moral right not to put it on the table? There must be a lot of wisdom in managing the application of this idea of transparency in all social spheres. Because there is a limit that is not dignified. Look, if you come to my house and I invite you for a coffee, my trash can isn't going to be on the living room table. Obviously not. Then you say, you're hiding your trash. No, everyone knows I have trash. It's there in the area, being sorted, treated the right way. It's a matter of decency and even a matter of courtesy. It's obvious that a house has trash, but am not going to put that trash in the living room. Out of respect for you, I offer the best I have. When we interact with others, sometimes we don't talk about our flaws. It doesn't mean that I don't have flaws. Of course I do. I'm dealing with them. It's implied. I'm a human being like anyone else with a bunch of flaws. But it's a matter of courtesy that I offer you the best I have. Wanting to display everything in a showcase sometimes makes people lose their sense of decency. Everyone is watching, so why change? Why should I work on this flaw of mine if everyone has already accepted me like this? Therefore, it's a very fine line between concealment and privacy. That at all levels it must be well managed. One element we've seen, and perhaps some of you might disagree with me. I hope not everyone does. We have something sensational. Today, a sensational means of communication is the internet and social networks. But there's a lack of transparency that causes a lot of harm. Today we have insults, we have aggression, threats, cancel culture, which for those unfamiliar with the concept, go look it up to see the absurd things that have been done. Would all of this be happening if everyone who posts content on the internet were required to put their name and some verifiable information? If everyone didn't have the privilege of impunity, would they say as many absurd things on the internet as they do? Would they offend people so violently? Would they spread so much falsehood? You realize that there was a lack of transparency there. People didn't know how to handle it. Sometimes it's excess, other times it's lack. I am a big supporter, and in fact, much of the work we do at New Acropolis is shared through the internet. It's a medium, and as a medium, it can be very good. But then, the lack of transparency can sometimes be complicated. Well, if I think something, why don't I own up to what I think? And take responsibility for it. Everything that comes from what I think, once I want to express it. In other words, this lack of transparency has caused a lot of harm, sometimes fatal. There have been people who have committed suicide due to bullying, harassment, and cancel culture on the internet. There's a lack of transparency in this process. Sometimes, too much can also be overwhelming. Sometimes you want to target someone, to harm them, and you start publishing things about their personal life. He argues with his wife, but why doesn't he argue with his wife? And what does that have to do with you? Isn't that part of a person's privacy? How many times do I open the computer? Here comes the celebrities, extra, so is arguing with his son on the street, his problem. Who among us hasn't lost patience with a child every now and then in life? Why does this need to be brought to the public and shared with everyone? I feel sorry for these people who can't go to the supermarket or can't go out with their kids. Because nosiness is invasive, be careful. So, that transparency is not confused with invasion. You see, there's a fine line between two radical elements that must be very well managed. Today, it's extremely common in our daily lives for us to use transparency as a way to abolish privacy to ensure honesty. Whether within a venture, within a business, if it's not transparent for everyone to see, there will be shady things, there will be some kind of scheme. Isn't that right? And it's quite curious because we're working with the following premise: we're only honest if someone is watching. This is a strange premise for a human community. Plato used to say, when he created his ideal republic, which he dreamed of in a dialogue called the Republic, that if you place a guardian watching over society, what guarantees that this guardian won't become corrupt along with society? Then you put a guard to watch the guard. What guarantees that he won't become an accomplice too, a watchman watching, the watchman of the watchman of the watchman? Soon, everyone is watching everyone, and no one is watching anyone. So, there is a way for this to be effective. And it's when you place this guardian within yourself. When it's your conscience that watches over you. All right, this is a temporary solution. The way we are, it has to be this, it has to be transparency. Coercion is a great lunch, but a terrible dinner. Do you know what this means? At lunch, sure, the person might not steal because everyone is watching. But at dinner time, the vigilance must already be internal. You must have already developed an authentic unity, or we will be forever touched by this story of only being good for appearance's sake. What time will it happen? Our true humanization. So, this is an element that also needs to be considered. At this moment, given the level of moral gap we've established, transparency is necessary. But we have to walk through this process. We cannot rely forever on the idea that we will always be watching. Everything, in fact, because it dehumanizes us. We are trained beings, not truly evolved beings. Humans evolved from the perspective of human consciousness. There must be common sense and a lucid middle ground. I consider this fundamental. It's the old myth of Gyges, which I've told you so many times before. Gyges was super honest. He finds a ring that, when he puts it on his finger, makes him invisible. Gyges' honesty came to an end. Are we going to live the myth of Gyges forever? Therefore, drawing a parallel here, I would say that transparency is a great lunch, but by dinner, we must already be serving honesty. Well, non-governmental organizations, that's another case where society is very strict. Imagine opening an institution with the purpose of benefiting underprivileged populations, people in need, people with specific health issues, whatever it may be, a charitable and voluntary action. And many well-intentioned people wanting to support this action invest in it. And you use the goodwill of others for illicit purposes. This must be one of the most immoral things one can imagine. Using money intended for children with cancer, for children and young people from the outskirts, for the elderly, for people who don't have access to education, to obtain personal goods, is not very uncommon, unfortunately. But we could say it is the most harmful thing. One of the most harmful things we can witness in society. Therefore, it is indeed good that this control exists. These NGOs must be very transparent so that we can ensure that the exploitation of goodwill, of human compassion, is not carried out. Have no doubt. We are living in a historic moment. We think we've evolved a lot that we've left behind. Barbarism, which was something associated with Attila, king of the Huns, or Genghis Khan of the Mongols. We think that today we no longer exploit the pain of others, that we don't profit at the expense of someone else's suffering. Look, this isolation has taught us a lot about this. We've evolved a lot from a rational standpoint, but from a psychological, moral, and spiritual perspective, we've lagged far behind. Perhaps a Greek, Roman, or even Egyptian man had good reasons to be faithful to the laws of nature. More than we are capable of raising these good reasons in today's times. We feel adrift in a chaotic universe. A whole cultural process has been building in our consciousness. A chaotic universe where things go unpunished, and the one who succeeds and is happy and the cleverest. Within this, there is a total absence of axis, of reference, and of direction. And within this, anything goes. So, there is this strictness regarding transparency in relation to NGOs. I believe that in this case, the rigor must indeed be extreme. There is nothing more cruel than exploiting human compassion and human suffering. Media. That's complicated, right? So, you know. Of course, transparency is something extremely necessary. Of course, that's an urgent matter. We all expect, by definition, that journalism serves us. We cannot be aware of everything happening around the world. So, we expect journalism, the media, to bring us the facts. There's no problem if these people or these institutions also want to express their opinions about the facts. We might be interested in hearing them, but the two things should be well separated. In such a way that it is clear what is fact and what is my opinion, and that it is stated, this is not the truth, this is my opinion. You can have yours. Today, everything is all mixed up. You can't tell one from the other, and those who dare to interpret differently are often rejected. It's as if everything is already chewed up, thought out, and you only had to sign up for one of these thought tribes, done, unable to dare to interpret through your own resources, will, love, and intelligence. Every human being has the ability to form an interpretation of the facts and has the right to have the facts presented to them that are not tainted at the root by predispositions, inclinations, and opinions, which are merely opinions and not absolute truth. When I do commented readings with my students, which is quite common, in general, I ask them not to read the preface before the reading. Do you want to use an effective study technique? Read the title, The Flaps, the author's biography, but don't read the preface written by others giving their opinion about the book. Because you won't dare to give your opinion. That guy who knows so much said this, who am I to think differently? I could make a list for you. If you give me a day, I'll do it. A list of 10 pages of people who gave their opinion on a book and spoke nonsense. In various historical moments, including today, I wasn't understanding anything. Therefore, an opinion is just an opinion. We tend to be swayed by others' opinions because it's easier than thinking. Copying, that's not it. Cloning is easier than knowing, thinking, and creating your own vision. It's good that these things are well separated, and we should know fact from opinion. It's not quite what we've experienced in various occasions of our historical moment. Therefore, if there is a list of activities that we could register, where transparency should be at the top, the media should perhaps be in the first place, for sure. Along with NGOs and many other activities, education is very similar to the media. Education must never underestimate a child's or teenager's ability to understand, which aligns with their age and worldview. But since it is they themselves who conceived it, they dare to renew it in a future moment when they are more mature. However, if they buy into that ready-made opinion, they will respect it as if it were an absolute truth, and will have difficulty letting go of it. It will be a straitjacket. Therefore, it is also education. There should be great care in determining when this teenager, this preteen, is ready for you to give an opinion, for them to know it's just an opinion, and that they have the right to have their own. Otherwise, you restrict people, you put them in a straitjacket. It doesn't give them the chance to think for themselves. They trust too much because they think the other person is more capable than they are. Therefore, they buy ready-made software, just running on the tracks. Everything is already thought out, so why think? So, education should also uphold absolute transparency. That we will offer historical, scientific, political, artistic, cultural, and indeed, civilizational heritage. Indeed, here, this happened. In my opinion, regarding this at another time when this young person. Not before that, I don't recommend it for a child, but this young, more mature teenager has the ability to know it's just their opinion. I can think differently, otherwise we will freeze humanity indefinitely. One generation freezes the next, and the other does the same thing. No one frees themselves from this. There is no new. There isn't that ability to look, see, and conclude from one's own experience. A lot of the data that is given to us collectively. If you check through your personal experience, you'll see that they aren't true. I've mentioned on some occasion, in a lecture we gave together, that it's very common today to be bombarded with the information that humanity is, for the most part, devoid of principles, morals, values. In other words, humanity is hopeless. And from that statement, I took the time to reflect on the humanity I have known. Throughout my 56 years of life, I've come to the conclusion that truly exceptional people have been few. A large number of ordinary people who wanted to take care of their lives didn't want to harm anyone, but wanted to provide health and comfort to their children. Normal people and the truly criminal, truly corrupt, truly degraded individuals must have been about 3% of the people I've met in my life. And look, they were rare, 2 or 3 people. Who has spent so much time around criminals? That's not common. So, we realize that this statistic from our experience doesn't match the statistic that's bombarded at us. Through so many means of information, social networks, communication, and everything else. When we learn to think for ourselves, Our personal collection is already enough to debunk a lot of things coming from outside. I find it incredible how sometimes a person denies their own experience, to believe in a stereotyped opinion, worse than hers, because they don't trust themselves enough. Therefore, one of the fundamental elements is to nurture human self-confidence so that they can be transparent. To have the courage to be transparent and say, I see this differently. Who are you? I am a human being, like you. Therefore, I have the same right as you to see things with my own eyes, with my own conscience, with my own discernment. I didn't enlist, since I was born into some tribe. I didn't sign any contract saying I was obliged to think what everyone else thinks. That never existed. I may not know, but I am free to see things according to my own criteria. And I must use this. This is a fundamental element as well. Transparency, then, within education as well. Top of the line. We've already talked about social networks. Be very careful with this issue of doing and hiding. Do and own it. This simple duality, do and own it, would already be capable of banishing the specter of cancel culture that's coming our way. That has been destroying the lives of simple people, of ordinary people, people whose lives are being completely undermined. Ruined, destroyed, because of a small group of crazy people with nothing better to do who decide to cancel this person for no reason. In the United States, there's that famous case of the man who was drumming on the side of his car, and they said he was making a racist gesture. He lost his job, lost everything, couldn't find work anywhere, was left in ruins, unable to feed his children. And these people, what happened to them? If it weren't anonymous, if it were transparent, we would deter things like this. Therefore, I think the maxim, do and own it, is a good principle for transparency, and it should be present in this field. I quickly brought you an example of a lack of transparency. Well, I am a philosopher, and one of the things I really enjoy is studying fallacies, sophisms, the way we communicate without transparency. In other words, we, without being aware, practice opacity, that is, a lack of transparency, in the way we create convoluted sentences in a twisted reasoning. Sometimes, it's not even intentional, we receive it, everyone does it, we just went with the flow. But it's good for us to occasionally stop and observe our words. Does what I'm saying have any basis? I brought you just a few examples. Just take a look. Called false dilemma, which is the excluded third. Are you with me or against me? There isn't a third, fourth, or fifth possibility. I can be with you, but I don't agree with this action of yours. I am your friend. I want to keep you from making a mistake. I'm not against you. I'm fighting for you. There are countless other possibilities. The excluded third, how many times do we use this? It's very, very misleading. That's a statement without any foundation. There are thousands of other possibilities. Beyond being with me or against me. I believe the two are different. And we use this way too much. This is a lack of transparency. What else? Ignorance, the fallacy of ignorance, is quite interesting. Such a thing is true. Why? You haven't proven it's false. So and so is dishonest. Why? No one has proven that he is honest. What do you mean? If no one has proven that he is honest, he is given the benefit of the doubt. Isn't that right? In doubt, he has the right to ensure his honesty, to defend his integrity. If no one has proven otherwise, you assert a falsehood, as if, due to lack of evidence, you could accuse someone. Quite the opposite. Due to lack of evidence, you can exonerate someone. But in everyday conversation, this happens a lot. What else? Snowball effect or slip-up? That's a good one. The number of times I've heard that in my life. I don't know, you could write an encyclopedia, right? If I make an exception for you, I'll have to make one for everyone. Do you know this phrase? Lies, fallacies, lack of transparency. If I make an exception for you, it's because I've analyzed your case and you deserve it. I won't open it up for everyone. I'll open it for those whose cases I analyze and see that they deserve it. This will be open to others? No. That's not a thing. It's a way for you to try to seem like the good guy and to take the responsibility off oneself, to escape responsibility. No, I won't make an exception for you because you don't warrant this exception. Oh no, I want the person to like me. You can say this very gently, but you must say it. You don't warrant this exception, therefore I won't make it. It's not because it'll have to open it up for everyone. No, each case is unique. Each human being is a unique individual. A rule, a way of treatment. Anyway, that's one of the most common things in the world. In general, it's demagoguery. Wanting the other person to be on good terms with us and shifting the responsibility to others. What else? A complex question. What did you do with the money you stole from me? Pay close attention to this phrase. What did you do with the money you stole from me? Whatever you answer, you're assuming that you stole the money from this person, because it didn't give you the option to say, I didn't steal it. No, she just wants to know what you did or didn't do. Whatever you answer, you're guilty. In other words, embedding a false premise in a question that doesn't give the person an escape route. This is a fallacy, and a malicious one at that. We use it all the time. Well, there are many fallacies. I've brought a few cases here for you, small, just a few cases, the most well-known, the ones most used in logic courses, for example, which we study in philosophy. Composition and generalization. So and so, I've already proven that he's dishonest. So and so is Italian. So all Italians are dishonest. That's stupidity. That's stupidity. This cell is sick. This cell belongs to this body, so the whole body is sick. We know that's absurd. This is material for prejudice of all kinds, like, oh, I once met a German who was no good. Look, Germans are no good. You met a fellow. Which nation doesn't have a dishonest citizen? Sometimes, many, generally, many. This doesn't typify, it's a form of prejudice. And sometimes the opposite is true as well, which is division. In other words, in this country, people tend to speak their mind. An Italian comes to my house, and he won't let me speak. For heaven's sake, there might even be a certain stigma in the country. That Italians gesture a lot, speak loudly, but first of all, I'm not sure about the truth of this stigma. Secondly, I don't know so, and so, he is a human being. And a human being has a universe of possibilities that I haven't yet discovered. Both are fallacies often used to establish prejudices. What else? After that, because of that, the famous post hoc fallacy, does it mean that? I took the tonic, it either kills or cures, and 2 days later I was cured. Look, if you hadn't taken anything, you probably would have been cured. In other words, just because something happened afterward doesn't mean it's a consequence of what happened now. It could be the result of many other things. If that didn't exist, it might have happened the same way. So, don't think that the sequence of events over time. Sometimes this mistake is made when we judge a family situation. A conflict after so and so was harsh with him, he went and did such a thing. So and so is guilty. No, maybe he had been planning to do such a thing for a long time. That was just a normal everyday occurrence. Be very careful, because this greatly distorts evaluations. It's a very common, very crude way of reasoning. Appeal to force. You better agree with my arguments. Otherwise, you lose your job, that's obvious, right? In other words, winning by shouting, as they say in common parlance. This one doesn't even need comments. Appeal to pity. Look, I studied all night. It's not possible that I got this grade. Yeah, you study poorly. You don't know how to study. Take a study skills course. Or then sleep during the day to be more awake at night. Or, on the contrary, study during the day. In short, change your method, because your test was poor. This is evident. In other words, appealing to pity, appealing to violence, is basically when you can't defend an argument because it's weak, it's not truthful. So, you resort to external elements. To try to sell your idea to someone else, to try to pitch your case. A fish that hasn't been fresh for a long time. Or maybe it never was. Appeal to authority is even worse. This is very common, even, believe it or not, within intellectual circles, sometimes in academic settings, those who haven't been through an academic environment, and sometimes a not so well prepared professor, say it's true because Hegel said so, or it's true because Foucault said so. Call in Hegel, Foucault, to explain to me why they think this is true. It's not, it's dead. So, here I have to deduce whether this is true or not. And I might conclude that it isn't. The argument from authority is foolish. The person who created this theory must have experienced it and reached this conclusion. Now, if you haven't experienced it, you can't impose it on me by shouting, "Did you experience this? Are you the one teaching me this maxim? Have you proven, in practice, that this works?" No. So, you're passing on someone else's idea to me. Let me try it out. Nothing is true just because so and so said it. You are all aware that sometimes scientific theories, celebrated for centuries, one fine day someone comes along and discovers they were a big nonsense. And opinions too, within philosophy, this has happened many times. So, absolute truths, just because so and so said it, is one of the weakest fallacies. Let's say, trying to impose authority. Authority. It has left authority and deserves respect for what it has lived through, for what it has done, but its ideas should be tested. We all have this right. Attack the person. That's how it is, then. Tell me who doesn't hear a personal attack argument every day. And I will show you that you are in a paradise-like and perfect place. Every day. Who are you to say that? I am a human being. Do you hold any position? What social position do you hold? None, but I think this way. Excuse me, I am a human being. I never forget that famous dialogue of Ludwig van Beethoven. Beethoven, with a certain baron, who sent him a note and said, "Play such and such music, baron." Owner of some title of I don't know what, I don't know where. And Beethoven responds in the following way, no, Ludwig van Beethoven, owner of a brain. And that is it, it's over. In other words, don't come at me with that nonsense of personal attacks, considering someone as a person, no. For not having material possessions, or for not having a name, for not being a celebrity, they are not deemed worthy of having an opinion. Until the person tries to discredit the argument when they have no arguments to discredit it. So, they attack the one who expressed it. It's a form of cowardice. It's almost an admission that the argument is true. Because if it were false, you would attack and destroy it. In other words, it's an escape when you couldn't dismantle the argument. So, if you see this type of argument, you can be sure. The person has probably already seen that it's right. They're in a tough spot, they won't be able to take it down, and therefore, they're resorting to attacking the one who made the argument. What else? The people resorted to it. Everyone thinks like that. You're the only one who's going to think differently. Yeah, everyone thought the earth was flat. Then one day, there came a Giordano Bruno, a Galileo, a Copernicus. Everyone thought it was like that. One day, someone went there. That's how it is. Everyone thinks until the day someone dares to think for themselves, goes there, looks, and says it's not. From that point on, not everyone thinks. Soon, no one thinks. Why do I have to be a slave to the collective? Where did that infamous saying come from that says the voice of the people is the voice of God? The voice of the people, when grounded in ignorance and prejudice, has nothing to do with the voice of God. The one who perceives even a little, climbs a small step, gets a little closer to the truth. His voice is the voice of God, even if it stands alone in humanity. We've had doctors executed for discussing certain issues about the human body, such as Michael Servetus. We've had artists, we've had philosophers, countless executed because they denied the dogma of their time. And time proved that they were the ones who were right. There were millions thinking differently, and time said only he was right. Therefore, be cautious with this appeal to the collective. The collective means nothing. The collective is often collectively mistaken. especially because they tend to delegate to others the duty of thinking for them. Therefore, you see a lot of people, but there's only one opinion, which others have just cloned. They seem like many, but it's just one opinion. Someone thought and infected everyone with that idea. These are just a few examples of the lack of transparency in our communication. And it's worth it. Look for sophisms in your language. Look for sophisms in the statements you make. Start to achieve transparency in the way you express yourself. This is a very important step to promote transparency in the world. Within companies, it's also important to remember the misappropriation and misuse of scientific and technological discoveries. They often justify the need to hide certain things. In other words, transparency must respect a certain level of concealment. Someone is researching a vaccine, and then a malicious lab comes along, takes something that hasn't been tested. That is unknown. The damage it causes manufacturing, distributing everywhere, making illicit profits. In other words, there are fields where privacy must be respected. Privacy must respect pain, security, dignity. It must respect these things. Sports is also a field where transparency is very necessary today. Because people have become so obsessed with being on a podium, appearing greater than others, even if they don't have the merit for it, who fill themselves with anabolic drugs and a bunch of other things to achieve a false victory. Because it doesn't matter if you deserve it, what matters is having it. In other words, today it's very important to uphold the spirit of sports, which was that idea of higher, stronger, farther, in other words, surpassing your limits. He has been lost to victory at any cost. So, within this sports field, transparency is a priority today. Checking all stages of the process, unfortunately, maybe one day there will be more awareness and more love for the sport. In itself, as legitimate self-overcoming, and not just as a podium. And also, we must be careful because transparency is often used as an exhibitionist way to gain publicity. So, today you'll see, sometimes there are people who have a multitude of followers on social media. You look at it. What merit do they have? No. She or he posts, whoever it is, when they're with family, when they're, I don't know, wearing little clothing, when they're in a private setting, doing something that nosy people like to watch. Therefore, excessive transparency can also be a form of manipulation, which makes the curious run after that person for vulgar things, because they are fed by them. In other words, understand that it's a complex concept that we need to approach from all sides to prevent it from being exploited in a morbid way. The total denial of it is absurd, but it is taken to extremes without any criteria, is equally absurd. In fact, like everything in life, extremes always lie. We must seek the right path, the middle ground, the straight reason, as so many traditions have already said, considering modesty, secrecy, and trust. False transparency as well, we've already talked about this. It's very common in the media to give visibility to already manipulated material, a great discovery. No, it's not a great discovery. The discovery was made a week ago. This was worked on, manipulated, and now it has been brought to the public, already completely distorted. This is common not only in the media, but also on social networks themselves. Scandal factory, which many use, as we've already mentioned, as a way to gain attention and publicity. Giving visibility to personal matters. Arguments with the wife, as a way to undermine someone's public image, also used for that. It starts to take things that are absolutely private and personal, and give publicity as a way to boycott a person. Of simple and common things that no one has any business with. In other words, complex, like everything that passes through the hands of human beings. Ultimately, it's a non-absolute value filled with many ambiguities. Therefore, for transparency to be applied, it must walk hand in hand with straight reason, with common sense, with responsibility, so that it can indeed be like a diamond, like Vajra, like the Tibetan Dorje. So that it can make us solid, multiply the light, and allow us, in fact, to show what we have best, leaving this best present visible to everyone. With dignity and privacy safeguarded, consider then, as a synthesis of everything we've said, as essential for the correct application of transparency, the moral reform of man and the transparency of his life before his own conscience. You are seeing yourself all the time. Don't do it just for show, for you see that. You are seeing yourself all the time. If you respect yourself, you won't do certain things in front of your conscience. And the main transparency that I can say is the lever that generates all other consequences is to be transparent before your own conscience. And bring your conscience into your life as consistently as possible. And that's it. This is our chat for today. I hope it's beneficial for you. Thank you all very much and see you next time.